What does Jeff Brom's team need to do to clinch a spot in the ACC Championship game? We'll talk about all the possible scenarios that lead to the Cardinals punching their ticket to Charlotte on today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. As always, I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. A split show on the docket for today's episode. We'll have some football, men's basketball, and women's basketball talk throughout the entirety of the show. We'll begin in the football realm. Louisville, 2 ACC games left on the schedule. We'll talk about all the possible scenarios that could unfold that could find Louisville in the ACC Championship game in early December. And the men's and women's basketball teams both opened up their season Monday evening with victories. We will discuss those in the second and third segments, respectively. So, obviously, Louisville defeating Virginia Tech increases the chances that Louisville ends up in the ACC Championship. It's not a foregone conclusion. But as of right now, according to ESPN, the Cardinals have somewhere around a 90% chance to make the conference championship game, presumably against the Florida State Seminoles in Charlotte in that first weekend in December. I want to now sort of talk about what needs to happen and what can happen for Louisville to clinch a spot in the championship game, whether it be this weekend or next weekend, or even the weekend after that. What needs to happen? To sort of paint the picture of the setting of the ACC currently, Louisville sitting at 8-1. They are 5-1 in conference play. That is good for second in the conference. Virginia Tech, Duke, North Carolina, Boston College, NC State, and Virginia Tech all have 2 losses, and then Miami with 3. And on the outside looking in, currently Clemson, Pittsburgh, and Virginia have 4. So at this point in time, it seems like all signs are pointing towards Louisville getting the nod in that second spot. But whether or not they get there could be up to them, could be up to the teams below them as well. We're going to talk about the possible scenarios. Shout out to Kelly Dickey, famous Louisville stats guy, who has essentially tweeted out the possible scenarios. You can look at those scenarios at Real Card Game on Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. I feel like I'll forever call it Twitter, but X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. He tweeted out the possible scenarios, so we're going to talk about it. And I think that the main thing that you have to realize is the underlying factor, the silver lining, if you will, is that Louisville controls its own destiny. And it does not matter the scenarios if the Cardinals win the next 2 games. If they beat Virginia like they're supposed to, Louisville currently is sitting anywhere from a 19 to 20-point favorite in this game. If they handle business against the Cavaliers, if they then go into the next weekend matchup against Miami and win that, it doesn't matter about what the other teams do because you automatically clinch a spot. But for the sake of hypothetical talk, we're going to essentially discuss all of the possibilities. So as a Louisville fan, you're aware of what can go down in the Cardinals find their way in Charlotte. So for starters, we're going to break this down. The first portion will be, how does Louisville clinch this week? Well, it's pretty simple. Kelly Dickey tweeted out, Louisville clinches a spot in the ACC title game by beating Virginia if one of the following happens. So the prerequisite is, if one of the following happens, Louisville makes the championship game. Now, granted, this is all under the prerequisite that the Cardinals beat Virginia like they are supposed to. So let's say that they beat Virginia. They move to 9-1. They're 6-1 in conference play. How do they get to bowl eligibility? Well, the only way that they can get to bowl eligibility right away is if North Carolina loses to Duke. That's the only way that they can become bowl eligible this weekend. And then it doesn't matter what happens against Miami when it is relating to the ACC Championship stakes, etc. So North Carolina and Duke, that's the only way that this team can make it to the conference championship game right away, is if Duke upsets North Carolina. I don't even know really if you want to call it an upset, if they beat North Carolina in Chapel Hill this upcoming weekend. So that's the first thing is, and I think that that's probably the pretty much straightforward route. But to go a little bit further, spanning beyond this week, and like I said, that's the only way that Louisville can become ACC Championship eligible this week, getting that spot in the ACC Championship game. But even if it's not this week, if Louisville were for some reason not to beat Miami, let's play that hypothetical game for a second. If the Cardinals don't beat Miami, North Carolina, if they lose any of their final 3 ACC games, which Duke, Clemson, or NC State, 3 pretty respectable opponents, Louisville makes it to the championship game. Because North Carolina is sitting right now, obviously there's not common, there's no head-to-head matchup to base this off of. Carolina is sitting at 2 losses, so you're pretty much going between common opponent win percentage, which gets a little bit tricky. But if North Carolina were to lose any of their next 3 games, Louisville makes it in by default, regardless if they beat Miami. Granted, this is contingent on the Cardinals beating Virginia. Another straightforward one, Georgia Tech, a team that Louisville has defeated the first game of the season. If Tech beats Clemson and Syracuse, then at that time, Louisville would then get the nod into the championship game. You would expect Tech to beat Syracuse. Syracuse is, at this point, the worst team in the ACC, 4-5, 0-5 in conference play. But Clemson's a little bit more interesting. They just beat Notre Dame. I know that they lost to NC State, but they're a pretty solid team that can, you feel like, contend with any team almost in the country on any given week. So this is where you need a little bit more help. Obviously, I continue to discuss this is contingent on Louisville beating Virginia and not beating Miami. So you talk about the 2 teams you watch for being North Carolina and Georgia Tech for different reasons. If Georgia Tech were to win out and Louisville loses to Miami, then at that point, the tie, the 2-way tie or the 3-way tie would be in favor of the Cardinals. Now, there is another scenario that make things a little bit more interesting. It makes things murkier. That is, you look at Virginia Tech and Boston College, 2 teams that the Cardinals have defeated, right? The winner of that game, so the loser automatically drops down to 3 losses. If you beat Virginia, lose to Miami, you're at 2. It really doesn't matter. That team's out of contention. But the winner of that Virginia Tech-Boston College game will still only have 2 losses. If it loses, if that team, whoever wins that game, loses one of the next 2 games, then Louisville gets in. Virginia Tech has NC State and Virginia, and Boston College, on the other hand, has Pittsburgh and Miami. So 2 winnable, but also 2 very possible loss opportunities for both of those teams. So the 4 teams that you're essentially looking at as indications: North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Boston College, and Georgia Tech. If North Carolina wins out and Louisville were to lose against Miami, then you need some help from the teams that are playing Virginia Tech and Boston College or Georgia Tech. If Louisville wins out, they're in automatically. That's the silver lining here, and none of this hypothetical talk even has a remote amount of significance if the Cardinals run the table in the final 2 games and in conference play with 1 loss, because by default, they will get into the championship game. But if they were to lose, then essentially, you're cheering for NC State almost to run the table, because if they do, then North Carolina, if they beat North Carolina, Louisville gets it in. Virginia Tech, Boston College, if Virginia Tech wins and NC State beats Virginia Tech, Louisville gets in. And then obviously Georgia Tech, you're cheering for the Yellow Jackets as well. So a lot of scenarios sort of roaming at this point, and I try not to make it too tough to understand. The main thing to focus on if you're a Cardinals fan is that even if you don't win out, there's still a great chance that you can make it, but you would need some help. Main thing to focus on now, Louisville winning out. If they win this week and Duke beats North Carolina over the weekend, the Cardinals are in Charlotte for the first time since joining the conference. That's the main storyline. So we're going to preview the upcoming matchup against Virginia on tomorrow's episode of the show. But for the entirety of this episode, it's basketball season. And I know that there hasn't been a ton of excitement surrounding the men's basketball team heading into the offseason, especially with the loss to Kentucky Wesleyan. But they bent but did not break, overcame a double-digit deficit to UMBC, and won in a thriller against the Retrievers on Monday evening. We're going to talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. My favorite, the 3-leg single game parlays. That's especially how you win your money. And there's profit boosts as well for those, whether it be specific matchups or sports as a whole. Do yourself a favor. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is the official partner of the NFL. Hey, Cardinal fans, once again, Louisville back in action on Thursday this week, but don't forget, the following day, Locked On College Football Kickoff Live will air at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications. The conference rivalry games while also going in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts, covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time on any Locked On College YouTube channel. You won't want to miss it, so be sure to stay tuned. The football matchup is on Thursday, but that's not the only big news of the week. On Monday, both the men's and women's basketball teams tipped off, I should say, the 2023-24 campaign. We'll start with the men's basketball team, who had an up-and-down contest against the UMBC Retrievers. The Cardinals entered this game. I think the final line was around, I want to say 8.5, but it started out at 11.5, sort of fluctuated, but nonetheless, a game that the Cardinals should have won. And for a lot of fans, it was critical that this team won the first game and really winning the first 3 games, but you have to take it a game at a time, especially considering that you lost to Kentucky Wesleyan. It was a very lackluster, uninspiring performance. And, you know, to be able to prove the critics wrong and to silence the doubters, you essentially had to go out and win games. I mentioned you can't change the national perception of this program until you consistently win. Granted, it wasn't a pretty victory, but I'll argue that a win is a win. And there's a lot to unpack in this matchup. There's positives to take away from this game. There are a lot of improvement that needs to happen following this game. But I will say that I wasn't expecting a perfect performance. It's game 1 of the season. When has Louisville ever been great in the first game of the season? I mean, it is what it is. You have to allow this team some time to gel. But we'll start out with the positives. I felt like some of the things that I wanted to see from them in the exhibition sort of came to fruition. Louisville out-rebounded UMBC by 12, which was a breath of fresh air after the Cardinals were out-rebounded by double digits against Kentucky Wesleyan. I felt like they were more aggressive in utilizing their size and getting to the paint, something that I felt that they should have done in the exhibition games. They utilized the strength, the athleticism to get the ball towards the rim, get to the free throw line. I would like to see them make more free throws, but I mean, they went to the line 39 times, and I would argue that, I mean, they got fouled a ton. So it really seems justified to me. Looking at some other things, outside of that, Mike James was the star of the night. He had a 25.10 rebound double-double. I thought he was fantastic. 50% from the field, 13 to 14 from the free throw line. Asserted his ability and strength to get to the rim. I really think that he could end up potentially being Louisville's number 1 or number 2 player this year. He looks pretty solid. I think that, the hustle is there. And that's something else with this team, is that in the game against UMBC, I'm not sure there was ever a point last year in which the hustle matched what I saw on Monday evening, which is a good sign. It seemed like the team cared more, especially on the offensive end. There was more hustle. And that's something that you look forward to seeing. I thought you got some good minutes from Tyler Johnson as well. The true freshman point guard played 21 minutes, 12 points. The vision is there. I like the minutes from Emmanuel Okorafor. Despite only playing 10 minutes, he had 8 points and 6 rebounds, 2 blocks to go along with that. Trey White, Sky Clark had tough nights offensively. Some good minutes in the first half from Dennis Evans. Huntley Hatfield was aggressive on the boards, but struggled to hold on to the basketball early in the game, and also struggled to score a ton. JJ Traynor, 27 minutes off the bench, double figures in scoring. Caleb Glenn only played 3 minutes, but I like the effort there. In terms of areas of improvement, I think that there are a considerable amount. Number one, the offensive side of the ball. You look, the turnovers were still an issue. Unforced errors. I understand it's not going to be a pretty performance, but the Cardinals had 14 turnovers to go along with 9 assists, and that's not good whenever you have a negative assist to turnover ratio. Louisville also shot the ball 2 of 14 from the 3-point line, which is 14.3%. There's a group of fans that basically said, they're not essentially going to miss all their shots like they have been moving forward. And although I agree that they're not a team that's always going to shoot 14% from the 3-point line, I think one of my main concerns is how good this team is perimeter shooting wise in the long term. I think that was a question coming into the year. And although I think the numbers are going to rise, they almost have to. You're not going to only make 2 of your 14 attempts each and every game. But I don't necessarily know at this point in time if this is going to be a great 3-point shooting team. This is going to be a team that has to rely on its athleticism to get into the lane and finish around the rim. I felt like offensively still a lot of isolation basketball. It seemed like a lot of one-on-one guys taking their man off the dribble and trying to get to the rim, which worked against a team like UMBC. But I'm interested to see how it's going to work against Power 5 competition, better mid-major opponents, etc. Like I said, the ball movement is there, but it hasn't really been effective. It's essentially just kind of trading the ball off at the top of the key in the half court. And I would like to see more high-low action, some more delayed handoffs that get some solid looks in the corners and free up some space for Dennis Evans, who commands a ton of defensive attention. And I think, I liked what I saw with Sky Clark and Tyler Johnson on the court at the same time. Tyler Johnson's going to be an absolute baller. I truly believe that. So I think that he's going to be pretty solid defensively. That's where it's rough. The team scored 93 points, which is great. I'm sorry, 94 points, but they gave up 93. And that's the main thing here. On-ball defense, the team continually looked lost all night. Open shots from UMBC. I mean, you can look at it and say, when is a team going to shoot 52% against Louisville from the 3-point line? I mean, sure, that might be an anomaly from a shooting percentage standpoint, but I mean, a lot of this was UMBC beating the Cardinals down the court. Some of these were just completely open looks. And it's hard to really get excited about a victory when you give up 93 points to a mid-major team, potentially one of the worst teams that you'll play all season. But a win is a win, and you relish that, you celebrate that, and you move on to the next game. And hopefully you can build upon that. The best culture that you can establish is a winning culture, and hopefully this can sort of serve as the foundation. But a lot of stuff we need to look for in the next game against Chattanooga. So we will discuss that matchup, obviously, when it comes time. But not the only Louisville basketball team in play on Monday evening. The Louisville women's team started out on the road and got an 18-point victory over the Cincinnati Bearcats, a completely new team for Jeff Walz's program, and some pretty solid performances. We'll talk about that here momentarily after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, Gametime. Look, the game against Virginia is getting closer. You shouldn't have to worry about when you're buying tickets to any type of Louisville game. That's why you need to utilize Gametime. It's the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all sports with the last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. For me, the main thing I love about Gametime is the lowest price guarantee. You'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. As I mentioned, this is a completely new team for Jeff Walz and the Louisville women's basketball program. The coaching staff had to replace 6 of the top 7 scorers from last season, over 8, 9, maybe even 10 scholarship players. And, well, it was an up and down performance against Cincinnati in the opener, but a win is a win, and they won by almost 20 points. It was rough in the first quarter. The Cardinals opened up the season trailing after the first intermission, but due to a 22-7 second half advantage, Louisville went into halftime with a solid lead. They ended up losing the third quarter and turning around and winning the fourth quarter. But the main thing for me is consistently watching this team gel. I liked what I saw from Jeff Walz's team. Obviously, these players are going to continue to get better playing with each other. We saw this team win the Global Jam up in Canada in the summer, which was a solid level of competition. But I was interested in seeing the rotation, and 2 players scored in double figures. Jada Curry was 4 of 9. She had 13 points to go along with 2 rebounds, 2 assists. Sydney Taylor is my projected top scorer for this team. The transfer from UMass led Louisville's scorers with team high 16 points. She was almost 50% from the field, 2 of 7 from behind the arc. She had 16 points. Olivia Cochran struggled from the field, but still led the team with 10 rebounds. Nyla Harris played 16 minutes. But one thing that I found interesting was the true freshman from Turkey that played for Fenerbahce, Elif Istanbuloglu, the 6'3" freshman from Turkey, had some very solid minutes. She had 7 points off the bench, played 21 minutes, which is most of any of the reserves, was 3 of 4 from the free throw line, had 3 rebounds, had a block as well. I think that she is going to play a larger role for this team than I may have expected. But they got some solid minutes from Marissa Russell, Nina Ricards, Lily Love, who all played over 15 minutes last night, respectively. Alexia Mobley and Henny Van Schaik also saw some time on the court. The main thing for me moving forward here for the team is I want to see who rises as the go-to scoring option. Even if it's a balanced attack, I feel like there's going to be times where you need that go-to scoring option. Louisville didn't necessarily shoot the ball all that well, 40% from the field, 30% from the three-point line. They did out-rebound Cincinnati by 14, which was solid. They forced 21 Cincinnati turnovers, and that's key. One thing that we've continually seen this team be able to do, even when the offense isn't there, respectively, the defense has been great. They out-rebounded their opponent, and they forced 7 more turnovers. Now, granted, you have to clean up some of the mistakes because Louisville turned the ball over 14 times. But I think that this is going to be a really good team once again for Jeff Walz, a team that's going to be in contention to make it back to another Elite Eight. I'm going to predict on Tuesday, November 7th, that this team will finish top 4 in the conference. They have a pretty solid non-conference slate. They will now go to the KFC Yum Center. They'll travel back home, KFC Yum Center, to host the DePaul Blue Demons. I'm extremely excited to see this team in action at the Yum with the home court advantage that this fan base brings to the table. So great opening night performance from Jeff Walz's team. Some areas of improvement nonetheless, but I'm excited to see how this new group of players continues to gel. So talked about the ACC Championship football scenarios. The men and women's basketball team both opening up their seasons with victories. That's going to wrap up today's episode of the show. Tomorrow's episode is all about previewing the upcoming matchup against Virginia on Thursday, 7:30 kickoff time at L&N Football Stadium. Or I said that wrong. L&N Stadium at what am I doing? Just forget it. The show's over. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you back here really soon.